everyone. Thank you for joining the Center for Learning Health System Sciences for our monthly impact seminar. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few expectations. Today's seminar will be recorded. You can enable closed captioning by hitting the Show Captions button next to the Raise Hand option in the Zoom menu. The public slide deck will also be made available on our website under the Education tab. I will post the link in the chat along with a short questionnaire asking for a seminar topic and speaker suggestions, which we'd greatly appreciate. Following the presentation, we invite you to raise your hand or type questions in the Q&A. And in particular, we welcome questions exploring the many dimensions of impact that these ideas, technologies, and practices have on the learning health systems. As a reminder for upcoming LHS events, our next impact seminar will take place on Tuesday, June 6th with Dr. Stacy Villinger, a family medicine doctor and instructor of primary care and population health at Stanford University. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Genevieve Melton-Mukes to introduce our speaker.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am thrilled to be introducing Dr. Yuan Luo from Northwestern University to all of you. He's an associate professor of preventive medicine in the Division of Health and Biomedical Informatics and in the McCormick School of Engineering and Department of Pediatrics. In addition, he also serves in leadership as the director for the Institute for Augmented Intelligence in Medicine and the Center for Collaborative AI in Healthcare. At the Northwestern University Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute and the Institute for Augmented Intelligence in Medicine, he also serves as the Chief AI Officer. Dr. Luo earned his PhD degree at MIT in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. His research interests include machine learning, natural language processing, time series analysis, integrative genomics, and big data analytics with a focus on clinical applications. He's widely published in top-tier journals, has a very active extramural funded program, and in 2020, he was recognized in the field of informatics and was awarded the New Investigator Award by AMIA. Nationally, he's also demonstrated significant leadership, and one really specific example was bringing to fruition this past year the AMIA Data Science Year in Review. I am really interested in this talk in particular, and I think it is sort of the elephant in the room, his talk about large language models. And so with that, please join me in welcoming him here. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Melton-Mukes, for the great introduction. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss our recent work and reflections on large language models to understand biomedical text. So in the field of NLP, perhaps the most significant development recently is large language models. And two representative architectures are BERT and GPT. While GPT only considers the left context when making predictions, BERT takes into account both the left and right context. In addition to the architectural differences, the earlier model of ELMO is a feature-based approach, but BERT and GPT both are fine-tuning approaches and will be our focus today. This talk will cover our recent work and reflections on multiple categories of healthcare tasks, including medical and scientific communication, biomedical resource building, assisting clinical practice, and informing public health surveillance. First, let's look at using ChatGPT in medical and scientific writing. So in our study, we evaluated the abstracts generated by ChatGPT for 50 scientific medical papers. We gathered titles and original abstracts from current and recent issues of 5 high-impact journals and compared them with the original abstracts. We used the prompt, please write a scientific abstract for the article title in the style of journal at certain links. And note that the link is superfluous here because ChatGPT cannot browse the internet. And ChatGPT's knowledge cutoff date is September 2021. So by the time of our experiment, so given this, ChatGPT is sensitive to previous queries in the same chat. and we ran each prompt in a new session. While all the output appeared superficially to be formatted as a scientific abstract, only 16% correctly used the headings particular to the specific journal in the prompt. And so now I want to ask the audience a question, and please feel free to type the answers in the chat. If we ask a human, let's say a physician, to try to distinguish whether the abstract is generated by ChatGPT or if it is an original abstract written by human, what do you think is the percent that ChatGPT gets things right? Please feel free to type your answer to the chat. And I'll try to monitor what's coming up. So somebody said 50%. Any more guesses?
Are you able to see the list of replies?
I'm only seeing yours.
Okay. Oh, well, I will moderate. That is fine. We have 80%, 60%, 90%, 75, 70, 60.
Wow,
So I
that's
think
a wide
50 was
range.
the lowest.
Which one is the lowest? 50 is the lowest.
50 is the lowest.
Okay, yeah, that's a wide range. And in a few slides, I will reveal the answers. Okay. The first thing that we looked at is to compare the reported patient cohort sizes between the original and the generated abstracts. And as you can see here, the patient cohort sizes were at similar order of magnitude between the original and the generated abstracts. And their Pearson correlation is fairly decent. It's 0.76. Then we look at whether we can use AI output detector to differentiate the two. And we found that the AI detector, they found a high probability of AI generated output in many of the generated abstracts. And this is compared with very low probability of AI generated output in nearly all the original abstracts. But 34% of generated abstracts received a score below 50% from the AI output detector, including 5 with scores below 1%. And there was only one original abstract that scored above 50% on the AI output detector. And the detector had an AUC of about 0.94, and this indicates excellent discrimination between the original and the generated abstract. The next thing that we looked at is whether ChatGPT generated abstracts, it can be detected for plagiarism. And we used a web crawling plagiarism detection tool. And we found that nearly all the generated texts were deemed completely original by the checker. Now, the time to reveal the answers. Back to our poll question. And we evaluated whether blind humans could identify ChatGPT generated abstracts, and reviewers were able to correctly identify 68% of the abstracts as being generated by ChatGPT abstract as being generated. As you can see, humans actually perform worse than the AI detectors. And reviewers indicated that it was surprisingly difficult to differentiate between the two. And the abstract they thought were generated by ChatGPT were superficial and vague and focused on details of original abstracts, such as inclusion of the clinical trial registration numbers and alternative spellings of the words. And observations noted while interacting with the model where it's generated, including those non-existent clinical trial number. And so we can see that ChatGPT writes believable scientific abstract, though with completely generated data. And these are original without any plagiarism detected, but are often identifiable using an AI output detector and by skeptical human reviewers. Abstract evaluation, and in this case, for journals and for medical conferences must adapt policy and practice to maintain the rigorous scientific standards. And we suggest inclusion of AI output detectors in the editorial process and clear disclosures of such use. And the boundaries of ethical and acceptable use of the large language models to help with scientific and medical writings here, as we showed, remain to be determined. Next, let's switch gear to BIRD, the bidirectional models, and also look at a different task, building knowledge graph resource and application in biomedical field. We mentioned BIRD is suitable for fine-tuning for other tasks, and here we're looking at building knowledge graph. And this illustration shows fine-tuning of the BIRD for knowledge graph prediction, especially predicting the triples and links, which is predicting the head entity or the tail entity, and predicting relations. For a given token, its input representation is constructed by summing the corresponding token segment and position embeddings. And after passing through the attention mechanisms of BIRD, we learned the final hidden vector of the special CLS token, as you see in the beginning of the sequence here, and the input tokens. And the final hidden state corresponding to the special CLS class token is used as the aggregate sequence representation for computing the score for the triple or for the link or for the relation prediction. And as you can see, for triple and link prediction, we used a binary cross-entropy loss. And for the relation prediction, we used a multinomial cross-entropy loss. The dataset that we used covered a wide range of generic and medical specific data sets. Some of the data sets are constructed from WordNet, and others are constructed from Freebase. And we also have UMLS data set, which is biomedical focused. Now, when it comes to the results for triple classification accuracy using different embedding methods, we see that the knowledge graph BIRD that we developed obtained state-of-the-art results beating the previous models. And specifically, we report the ablation results, that is to reduce the number of training triples. And as you can see, the red curve corresponds to our knowledge BIRD model. And as you can see, it's least sensitive to the reduction of the number and the size of the training triples. And so in this case, it has shown great robustness in terms of the training data limitation. And this is likely due to the sparse attention that we used for the knowledge graph BIRD. And for link prediction, we used multiple data sets, including UMLS, to evaluate it. And as you can see, knowledge graph BIRD again performs best in most of the cases, and especially in terms of the mean rank. And as you can see, it can avoid very high ranks with the semantic relatedness of the entity and relation of the sentences that it uses in doing such classifications. And next, we report the relation of predicting results using the Freebase data. And we note that the knowledge graph BIRD also shows promising results and achieves the highest hits at 1 return results so far. And this is analogous to the pair classification in BIRD fine-tuning and can also benefit from the BIRD pre-training. And the main reason that we think why those BIRD models for knowledge graphs outperform the others are fourfold. The first one is being the input sequence contains both entity and relation word sequences. And the second one is whether the triple or link or relation classification task is very similar to the next sentence prediction task that BIRD uses in original pre-training. And this captures the relationship between the two sentences in large free text and making BERT models well positioned for the inference of the relationships among the different elements in the triple, or inference on the link, or inference on the relations. And the third factor is that the token hidden vectors are contextual embeddings. And this contextual information is explicitly used by the KG-BERT that we developed. And the fourth factor is that the self-attention mechanism can discover the most important words connected to the triple, or link, or relation. Next, let's see how we can extend those transformer models, those BERT-based models, to assist the clinical practice. These transformer-based models, such as BERT or clinical BERT or BioBERT, they are designed to typically handle text inputs up to a maximum of 512 tokens. But this limit poses a challenge for clinical texts, such as pathology reports, which tend to be much longer. To address this challenge, researchers have developed long-former and big BERT models and extend the maximum input length from 512 to 4096 tokens by implementing sparse attention mechanisms. And both models have achieved great success in the general domain, but their adaptability to clinical context remains unclear. So we aim to create two pre-trained language models, clinical long-former and clinical big BERT, which will be enriched with clinical knowledge through pre-training on a large-scale clinical nodes corpus. And our goal is to improve the performance of various clinical NLP tasks by developing models that are specifically trained on long clinical context, so that they could be used to extract relevant information from lengthy medical reports, and such as the pathology reports, and to aid in diagnosis and treatment decision-making. We conduct a comprehensive evaluation of these models on 10 downstream clinical tasks, including natural language inference, name entity recognition, clinical question answering, and clinical text classification. Our long text models significantly outperformed all short text models. Before elaborating on our own results, I wanted to mention a clinical study using large language model to adjudicate heart failure hospitalization from discharge summaries. And this is from external group, and we have no knowledge of prior to their Twitter account that mentioned and queued us, and their result is a perfect underwriting of our contribution, and it's absolutely rewarding to see their acknowledgement. Now back to our own results. We showed that the two long text models, clinical long-former and clinical big BERT, consistently outperform the short text models such as BERT or BioBERT or clinical BERT across all the four types of clinical NLP tasks. And interestingly, we observed that even in tasks with shorter sequences, such as medical natural language inference and OpenAI, the long sequence models achieved better results. And we attribute these improvements to the pre-training stages of clinical long-former and clinical big BERT, where the models can learn more long-term dependencies by extending the sequence length limit. And this allows them to learn a richer contextualization of clinical concepts and perform better in various clinical NLP tasks. And clinical long-former and clinical big BERT, they are now available on Hugging Face, and also the code is available on the GitHub. And since the release, we have received overwhelming interest and have had thousands of users access and download our models. And here's a toy example where the clinical long-former accurately predicts the next word is antibiotics, given the context of the treating pneumonia patients. And we welcome the research community to test and collaborate with us to further advance the field of clinical practice using large language model. Finally, we'll reflect on the potential use of ChatGPT in public health surveillance, such as pharmacovigilance. Pharmacovigilance primary objective is to ensure the safe and efficient utilization of medications, which involves the collection and analysis of safety information. Because typically 10,000 participants is needed to detect a rare adverse drug reaction during clinical trial, Post-market surveillance is necessary to recognize the full spectrum of drug safety concern. But patients might not report all the ADRs to their clinicians. In fact, only 1 to 10% of the average drug event is reported to FDA's official system affairs. And in contrary, conversations of ADRs happen more frequently on social media, which ChatGPT leverages in its training. And GPT-3, a precursor to ChatGPT, has previously been shown to identify drug synonyms from social media, where they are often described with the informal lexicon, much different from those generic or brand names that for those official drug safety reports. Because ChatGPT is trained on the vast and general corpus, it could quickly adapt to different domains with minimal fine-tuning. And to first evaluate whether ChatGPT can correctly identify drug abuse from tweets that were potentially in its training data, we supplied ChatGPT with examples of the drug-related tweets annotated by humans. And as you can see, in all 6 cases, ChatGPT was able to differentiate true drug abuse cases from the false ones, establishing the ground for it to be used to conduct more advanced pharmacovigilance tasks. We then tested ChatGPT's ability to provide adverse event information on Piqray, which is approved in 2019. Note that this is before ChatGPT's training cutoff date. And the drug is approved to treat metastatic breast cancer. And FDA highlighted the urgency to quickly report safety issues post-market in this report. Overall, the list of the adverse effects from ChatGPT, as we found, was comprehensive and relatively accurate. And the first 3 bullets from ChatGPT corresponded exactly to the top 3 high sensitivity ADRs observed in the key phase 3 clinical trial that led to the drug's approval. And the other 2 bullets, lung issues and infections, are also confirmed from FDA and its European counterpart EMA reports. And interestingly, liver dysfunction was not found in the reports we examined, but they are related to the lab measures, this ALT increase and albumin decrease, that were found in reports we examined. But the related lab measures were investigated in those reports. It's still hard to determine if ChatGPT fabricated this ADR or due to its generative nature, or whether it's indeed detected some signal from those training sources, especially from the values of the lab test measures. Determining the cause of the adverse drug reaction is a logical next step, and this is where ChatGPT falls short, as we found. And ChatGPT only provided 1 drug-specific cause when the other 3, like individual variability, were highly general. And asking for scientific evidence to support the only drug-specific cause, the inhibition of the PI3K pathway, we found mixed results. In 2 of the papers ChatGPT mentioned, one of them did not contain the word insulin at all, despite ChatGPT claiming so. And for the other paper, biological mechanisms of how the drug can cause hypoglycemia were discussed. And ChatGPT provided only a close summary, because we can see that ChatGPT says the drug inhibition of PI3K, this is correct, but it does not impair insulin signaling as ChatGPT suggested. Nevertheless, we see that ChatGPT's reply provided a valid starting point for downstream research to be done by human experts. With this extensive training data, ChatGPT has the potential to be a pharmacovigilance knowledge base, but it will likely not be a comprehensive one. It can recognize furosemide, which has been widely prescribed to treat fluid retention, along with its brand name Lasix and the Chinese names. But when one of the furosemide Chinese brand names was used, ChatGPT confused it with an herbal compound drug. When its iMpact name was used, ChatGPT confused it with an antibiotic. And for both cases, a human search on Google yielded the correct results. In addition, the selective coverage of ChatGPT should also be considered for scientific research. In a task to find drug-drug interactions, ChatGPT neglected one of the only 3 DDIs on the drug label, but included 2 other ones that had lower clinical concerns. These results showcase ChatGPT's limitations as a domain-specific knowledge base. A more realistic case is to leverage ChatGPT's text summarization capability for case review. Traditional pharmacovigilance is conducted by case reviews, which is a laborious and costly and time-consuming process due to the unstructured nature of the reports. And ChatGPT could help automate this process. We supplied ChatGPT with a de-identified case from the 2018 N2C2 challenge, and within seconds, ChatGPT summarized the key mentions and the potential ADRs they caused with high accuracy. This task demonstrated ChatGPT's ability to conduct name entity recognition as well as relation extraction. And for future directions, one thing that is near and dear to my heart is to integrate large language models into streamlined, interoperable, and scalable biomedical NLP. Because physicians lack bandwidth and expertise to do NLP. And so what we are doing at the health system level is bulk NLP. That is to standardize and bulk processing all the clinical notes from the enterprise data warehouse so that we can map them from unstructured text to the structured information and deposit them in a accommodated model that researchers can query directly. And we have been used in-house development pipeline, but now we have the option to also adapt large language models such as ChatGPT to do some of the component of the pipeline for us. And this can help disseminate and democratize this tooling and resources, which can have synergy with innovative education initiatives as well. And so to what extent can ChatGPT and large language models help in different NLP tasks? And so I did a 4-month exploration. And as you can see, despite I intentionally used some grammatically incorrect prompt, ChatGPT still was able to get almost all of the follow speech tagging correct in this case. For the sentence, progress notes and pathology report contain rich information on breast cancer, local, distant recurrence, and contralateral events. And the next task I'm asking you to do is to do named entity recognition. And as we can see here, once we come down to the task of parsing, then ChatGPT shows interesting behaviors. The parse trees, it looks like it's decent, but then if you look at it closely, you will see that there is a verb phrase down here. There is a verb phrase that's below events. And so it looks like roughly like a tree-shaped constituency parse trees, but as you closely look at it, it is incorrect at multiple places. But interestingly, if you look at the description, it generates of the constituency for the sentence, much of it was correct. And so there's some mismatch between the textual format of the representation of the answers versus the graphical format of the representation of the answers. So this is interesting to keep in mind, but it also reminds people that for more complex NLP tasks, there is still much room for improvement using such large language models, and especially if you want to get those zero-shot or few-shot abilities with very little training in order to achieve good performance. In the second direction that I wanted to mention that we could go into the future is to use large language models to leverage and integrate multi-model healthcare data. And large language models, people naturally apply to text, but there are also other novel uses of these models to model the genetic sequence and to guide protein sequence design. And as we have reviewed in a recent article, There are many other modalities that collectively they could be very synergistic. And if you're layering them on top of each other, they could provide this triangulated evidence that help you understand complex disease and inform targeted therapy. And it would be great if you could leverage large language models to integrate those modalities. Because if you think about how human reasons and how we think, we synthesize all those different types of the data and form and think to ourselves much like in a natural language reasoning format. And we could analogously apply those large language models to mimic such thinking process. And the third direction that I want to mention relates to the paradigm shift for machine learning. We live in a dynamic and evolving healthcare landscape. And just look at what we have gone through during the pandemic. The steps of the conventional machine learning workflows react to human expert input and data input and has difficulties adapting to the evolving healthcare landscape. Reflecting on this gap, we advocate for moving from reactive to proactive multimodal machine learning. Proactive machine learning has two key cycles to automate the feature engineering, which is level 1, and refine upstream data collection and preparation, which is level 2. The recent adoption of the deep learning in healthcare research has started to enable automated feature engineering, which is level 1. But level 2 proactive machine learning is still needed to evolve solutions in a highly dynamic situation such as the pandemic. Now we have more hope to do it in a more realistic and feasible way because dialogue large language models such as ChatGPT fits perfectly in the proactive machine learning paradigm, and they can inform targeted data collection and guide all augmented data preparation to continuously refine their answers. The vision is clear and the future is near. I want to close with the message of let us work together and bring it to a whole new level. Thank you for your rapid attention, and I'm open to questions.
Wonderful, thank you. That was incredibly informative. And we are ready to take questions. Either type it in the Q&A, in the Zoom Q&A, or you can raise your hand and I will.
Ginny, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a wonderful talk. I love that we're talking about this topic now. It's so timely. I'm really curious. I mean, you looked at the literature in particular. Where do you see manuscript writing, grant proposals, et cetera, going, and how, I might edit or be an associate editor on a journal. How should either the journals approach it or folks that are reviewing or editing think about this?
Right, so that's a great question. And as we found from the study, humans have at least some difficulty in detecting which is written by AI, which is written by a human. And not only in terms of the false negatives, but also in terms of the false positive. And so this, even if we are using, let's say, human verification, then we need to be extremely careful because under the rationale and principle of presumed innocent until proven guilty, it's really hard to call someone out, even if we have the suspicion. And so I think much of it will rely on a honor system, and people abide by the code of honor. And even if we use the AI detectors, it's not going to be 100% perfect. And once a technology is born, it cannot be unborn, and people are going to use it. And even myself, I can admit that I use ChatGPT to help improve my writing, to make it more eloquent and to make it more suitable in style. And people are going to use it. And the question is that how are we going to adapt to the situation? And for some of the adaptation, it can be beneficial, especially if it can help us write faster, and if we convey our ideas, faster and timely fashion to our colleagues and receive feedback faster, that could potentially be a good thing. And it's ultimately the kind of ideas, the original ideas that we want to preserve and also to give credit for. And in the meantime, if we can just imagine that if we can write as fast as we think, then it could be much efficient in terms of the human communications knowledge. And so I think this is likely a double-edged sword. And right now I see that this is why we're advocating that we probably need some AI systems detector back in the back place to help us, to inform us whether it's likely to be completely written by a machine. And then we're gonna communicate with the authors and then to actually find out. And we should be conducting such an investigation in a really careful way, and ideally also adhere to the principle of assuming innocent until proven guilty. But on the other hand, I think people should also abide by the code of honor and abide by the honor system when it comes to the originality of the ideas. And this will still be a very important pillar for the scientific integrity and also for the innovation of the society.
All right. Okay, we have a question, and then we have a comment in the chat. Ray, if you want, Raising asks, what do you see the potential risks using LLM in EHR systems?
Right, that's a great question and also a very timely question. And so people probably are aware of the news that Epic is collaborating with Microsoft, and it's demonstrating quite interesting use cases, like especially in terms of the summarization of the patient and physician communication, which could save physician times. And we all talked about clinical burnout and due to the documentation burdens. And there could be very interesting and beneficial use cases. On the other hand, we got to be really careful about the patient privacy, and especially what kind of risks of using the clinical notes to help fine-tune those large language models can pose to patients themselves, because as we know that large language models, sometimes they can remember pieces of the corpus that are used to train them, right? So what if it accidentally spits out patient information that is inadvertently fed into the system, because the identification is not on the clinical notes, especially, is never going to be 100% processed, right? So we think we got to be extremely careful in terms of using those EHRs to train the model, to fine tune the model, and to apply it to the EHRs. And on the other hand, I think we can potentially approach it from some lower risk but higher reward use cases. I think clinical summarization and also use cases summarization, case report summarization, as we showcased in the pharmacovigilance applications, is one of them. And so we can start with this lower hanging fruit and then gain more understanding of the risk and beneficial profile of large language models as ChatGPT. And throughout the course, we can make our regulations and security measures more robust to the newly emerged landscape.
All right. Paul Draz has a comment that the nature policy is that first, no LLM tool will be accepted as accredited author on a research paper. And that second, researchers using LLM tools should document this use in the methods or acknowledgement sections. Paul, did you want to further comment on that, or?
Yeah, I think it's a very reasonable policy, and I totally agree that you cannot just ask like large language models to write a paper for you. Yeah, On the other hand, I think people do use it to polish their writings, and I think this is potentially also very beneficial to non-native speakers. For example, if some of, I mean, as a non-native speaker myself, I remember how much time I spent in terms of honing my language skills and polish my writing, and just imagine what if I could use all those times to conduct scientific research, and that could maybe I'll generate more publications, or maybe more grant applications, more fundings will be secured. And as we all know, that publications and grant fundings are also very important to investigators, and so this could pose both the benefits and the challenges in terms of scientific writing, not only to papers, but also to grant writing. And I've also seen use of ChatGPT by department chairs to write evaluation for their faculty. And so, and it's written as very eloquent and an interesting way, but that also poses the question on whether such writing is authentic. I think my general rationale is that we can use it as the writing assist tool, but if you want to rely like primarily on ChatGPT or such large language models, I think that might be a little bit too far.
Paul, did you want to further comment?
Yeah, I found these policies because I received a draft manuscript from trainees and they had not included an introduction. And having just heard a lecture on ChatGPT, I asked it to write a 2-paragraph introduction, and I provided prompts. And if they had written that introduction, I would have been very pleased with it. And so I think it's a tool that, like a statistical analysis software, we don't manually calculate, hazard ratios and the variance covariance matrix. We cite SAS or R. And if we use ChatGPT, I think we should cite ChatGPT for how it was used, because I think it is a tool, but again, the end product is obviously the responsibility of the authors.
Yeah, certainly I agree with that comment. And so I think even if we just use it to polish our languages and our writings, I think we should write that we have used it. And it's not like that uncommon that people use language tools. And I think many people use Grammarly, and many people use language tools that is online web-based tool. And ChatGPT, if we use it as another language tool, that of course this is much more advanced, and it can even improve on writing styles, and it can make your writings much more eloquent. And so definitely it deserves the proper acknowledgement whenever we're using it.
Great. Benjamin Knoll asks, as a follow-up to Genevieve's question, do you think statistical fingerprinting should be a legal requirement or regulation for widely used text generation tools like ChatGPT?
Statistical fingerprinting with ChatGPT. Could you elaborate on the relation of the two entities in the question?
Benjamin, do you want to further elaborate?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So there's a method that I haven't read a ton on it, but basically, when ChatGPT is working, it's using like a beam search to kind of chain together the most probable words, and you can adjust that basically so that it picks words with similar probabilities, but the eventual result is one that is uniquely identifiable to the system that generated it. And this basically adds a fingerprint to, it's like a lot of times they'll use fingerprinting on images, or like movie studios will use hidden fingerprinting on like pre-releases of movies for critics and things like that, where if it gets shared, they can find out its origin. I'm wondering if you think there should be any kind of legal requirement or regulation that the same thing should happen with ChatGPT, where the text is actually recognizable by some kind of tool as being generated.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and I couldn't help but I also wanted to point out that during my year in review in data science and AI, I actually asked 3 of my students to ask ChatGPT what should be included in this year in review with this topic. And the results come back to me as this showing this kind of fingerprint of who actually was asking ChatGPT, because they're slightly different. And one of them talks about the job market of generative AI. And so that I know somebody is looking for a job. And so it's one of my senior students who is about to graduate. And another one, their answers talks about the entrepreneur market. And so I know that someone is definitely into building a startup. And then the third result comes back mentioning in terms of the multimodal integration with large language models. And so I clearly know that which person that comes from, because we have just discussed that topic a couple of days ago. And so it clearly gives me this kind of fingerprint so that I know who asked this question on my behalf, even if they were mixed and didn't show who was asking this question. Because I think fundamentally ChatGPT, especially if you keep the session open, it will evolve its answers based on your previous questions, and those got built into the next answers. Then that leaves a fingerprint that could suggest the identity of the questioner. And this, as you duly pointed out, this definitely creates legal liability for whenever we're using the answers by ChatGPT or help us writing, because it somehow is adapted to our own style, and this is not likely going to be something that we can completely avoid. So I think definitely this is an observation that we should pay special attention to, and as more and more people start to use it, we could think about ways of classification of the answers to people. And then when they use these answers, we could introduce some random noise so that it's hard to trace. But even with that, I think there's going to be some fingerprints that's left over that's still linked to the patient's identity. I think with legal protection and regulation is still needed.
Steve Johnson asks, it seems use of LLMs has a similar issue with liability that using clinical decision support, CDS, has.
Yeah.
If an LLM summarizes patient information and makes an error that causes patient harm, who is liable? The physician, the LLM developer, or no one?
Right. So I don't think there is the proper legal regulation at this point, and there is evolving regulations such as the software as a medical device from FDA, but I don't think it's complete and mature enough to cover this ground. And this is why I was suggesting in the first place that we probably can pick up some lower hanging fruit, those tasks that are of low risk, let's say the textual summarization of case reports or of physician and patient communications, in order to help physicians to reduce their clinical burden. But in terms of really letting the large language models taking the helm of patient care, I think we're still very far from that being a reality. And even after these large language models have matured to a certain stage, I think it's still important to have humans in the loop to guide the AI or machine learning models, and in particular large language models, to give the sensible results, and to make sure that humans in the loop can also ward off some of the security risks that can be exposed by, let's say, putting EHR in the training input for the model or fine-tuning input for the model, and also investigate on the actual recommendations. But I think we're still far from that. And even we're at the stage, we still should keep humans in the loop.
Matt asks, assuming honest use of LLM by authors, do you have any thoughts on how the peer review process will need to evolve as we see an increased rate of paper production because of the ways LLMs reduce the difference between thinking speed and writing speed?
Right. So I think that's a great question. And I've long been feeling that it's so hard to catch up with all the literatures, and just look at the exponential growing curve of the publication numbers from PubMed. It's really exponential, and it's perhaps even faster than exponential during the pandemic. And on the one hand, we could use the summarization capabilities of ChatGPT and large language models to help us summarize the certain field. But on the other hand, do we really need all those papers? And this is likely not a question that large language models can answer. It's fundamentally, we need to think about the incentive of what drives people to produce those many papers. And I mean, in the medical field, I think papers are, some people refer to it as the academic currency, and they enable you to secure more funding, and they enable you to secure promotion, tenure, etc. But do we really need those papers if only for scientific advancement, right? So I think we need to align our incentive structure to what's really needed and what's really good for society. And I think people are starting to experiment with the idea that in addition to paper product, you could, let's say, build impactful data set, or even organize the impactful challenges so that it pushes forward the state of the art of the field. That's also a very solid contribution. And we need many more such initiatives, and also extensive discussions, not only within single institution, but also across all those institutions, because it's not going to help if only one institution takes the lead. Even if it's Harvard or Stanford, it's not gonna move the needle. We need many institutions to collectively work towards remodeling our incentivization structures in order to really adapt to the or to reduce the exponential growth of the literature, and focus on those really meaningful ones.
Thank you for that incredibly insightful answer. Rabina asks, do you anticipate that ChatGPT would eliminate many healthcare jobs? As per Business Insider, overall 47% of US jobs could be eliminated by AI over the next 20 years, especially in telemedicine.
Yeah, so I don't have a definitive answer, but I do have several perspectives that I can share. So on the one hand, if we look at past industrial revolutions, there are always going to be jobs that are eliminated. But we could take it from another perspective. With automation tools and assistive tools like ChatGPT and large language models, it can enable people to do things fast. And we could do the same amount of things with less people, or we could use same amount of people to do more things. And I hope we should move to the latter, to use same amount of people to do more things. And that will help many people retain their not exactly the same jobs, but their job security. And they might adapt to like being a human monitor of those assistive tools so that they can perform robustly and in a safe mode. On the other hand, there's going to be some jobs that are inevitably that's going to be replaced by automated tools, but there are also going to be new jobs that are being created. And just after the prevalence of ChatGPT getting very popular, there now becomes a job category called prompt engineer. And AI startups are offering ridiculous amount of salaries for prompt engineers, and that's a new categories of job that's being created. And I could imagine that there could be many other related jobs that are being created in when it comes to application specific domains, because it's sort of like we have a generic tool and then we need to adapt it to specific use cases. And such adaptation one needs human guidance and human specialized knowledge. And if you think about that, you can immediately recognize that, oh, we need prompt engineers in the medical field specifically, and then we need prompt engineers in the financial field specifically, and then you can let it ramify, and then there will be many jobs related job categories that's going to be created. And I'm sure that through the evolution, people are going to find the balance or the equilibrium of the elimination and creation of the jobs, and then the society will settle to a new norm.
Right, thank you. All right, last question from Nick. They ask, what are your thoughts on LLMs being able to improve the meaning of information from the EHR and replace the need for common data models?
The meaning of the information? I didn't quite catch the exact phrase.
Meaning improve the information from EHR and replace the need
For common data models.
Yes.
Right. So my personal perspective is that it's probably not going to replace common data models in a short term, because when it comes to common data models, it's because the different institutions, they use different ways to record their information. And for example, even in lab test results, they could append it with their institution's specific labels or the outsourced labs that produce those. And they could be using different unit systems, or it could be due to the healthcare process that resulted in peculiarities in specific institutions in the EHR system. And those definitely requires human knowledge to understand the process so that they could be addressed, and there could be countermeasures so that those information from different institutions can be unified together. And on the other hand, I think ChatGPT can make it more convenient, more efficient, and less laborious for certain tasks, and especially when it comes to, let's say, in terms of detecting the templates that's used by different institutions, right? So that can give you a hand up, help you do some heavy lifting in terms of detecting those, and that will help us to focus on the really important differentiating content of the data from different institutions, and can help us to focus our limited effort into really targeting them towards the toward the task that has the most return on investment. And on the other hand, I was also thinking that for common data models itself is still not perfect, right? So you remember that Epic flow sheet, there were many items like the ventilator settings, and also there are those other items that are currently not mappable into most of the common data models. And it's still a very ongoing process to recognize those currently unmappable items and then harmonize across the different institutions. And that effort needs human supervision and a lot of debates on whether we could unify certain things or not, and how they could be mapped in order to make the most sense for clinical workflow. And that I don't see, at least in the short term, to be replaced by tools like ChatGPT, because fundamentally, if you think about the underlying mechanisms of ChatGPT, it's basically predicting the next word or the next sentence or the next paragraph. It doesn't have this kind of reasoning abilities, although it pretends so, or we mistake it has this reasoning ability. It does not. Right? So unless we have some fundamental breakthroughs that these models can really respect the facts and then do factual based reasoning, unless that happens, I don't think we can we will be in anywhere close of using large language models to help with or to replace the accommodating models.
Wonderful. Thank you.
My
Thank you.
pleasure.
Yes, thank you for this wonderful conversation, and thanks to everyone for joining. In closing, our next seminar will be on June 6th, and we hope to see you then. Goodbye, everyone.
Take care. Thank you for having me.